In the wake of the recent mass shooting that occurred in Lewiston, Maine, the Attorney General's office and in partnership with local law enforcement felt it was important to provide updated training for law enforcement officers across the state, because it's incredibly important for those officers and, frankly, for members of the public to understand that if there is a dangerous individual, someone who may be suffering from an acute mental health issue, and those individuals have access to firearms, that there is a red flag law on the books here in New Mexico, and there is the ability of law enforcement officers to act on that information, to file a petition, to seek the temporary removal of those firearms, both to protect the person from immediate harm, from self-harm, but also to protect members of the public. And so I want to thank Sheriff Allen for helping us organize a training. That training is actually going to be conducted in this building in coordination, I believe, with the Albuquerque Police Department. And it is just the beginning of an effort by the Attorney General's office to offer that training statewide. We've actually sent a letter to our law enforcement partners in every county of the state, offering to come and provide that training for frontline police officers so that they understand the process, that they can work with their community members and constituents to make sure everyone understands what the law allows. But I think it's also important for us to take this opportunity, again, in the wake of recent tragedies, both here and across the country, to identify some concrete proposals to update and improve our existing red flag law. And to that end, we are here today to talk about 3 specific proposals that we would like members of the legislature and the governor to consider as they dig into some of the issues and ideas that we have for focused, targeted, lawful, and constitutional measures that can be taken to improve public safety. And so the first is to improve the timing of how red flag works. Currently, the New Mexico law, once an order is authored or given by a district court judge, there is a waiting period of up to 48 hours for the respondent to voluntarily submit their firearms. But that actually is something that doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about it, because a district court judge in issuing a red flag order had to have found that that individual was an imminent harm or an imminent threat and presented an imminent risk of harm to himself or others. And so if someone has been found to be an imminent risk of harming themselves or someone else in the community, it doesn't make a lot of sense to keep the firearms in their possession in their home for an additional 48 hours. It also doesn't make sense to prohibit law enforcement from conducting a search of the premises to make sure that all the firearms are actually recovered. In fact, most red flag jurisdictions across the country, if a judge has issued the order, it also permits law enforcement officers to make a limited search of the premises to make sure that all the firearms are recovered. And so that's a clear fix that we think needs to be addressed in the law. The second has to do with clarifying who can be a reporting party. There is a long definition of mostly close family or personal relations who are in a position to identify warning signs or dangerous behavior, and then they are supposed to turn that information over to law enforcement. What we have found, however, is that sometimes law enforcement themselves are in a position to serve as a responding party, reporting party themselves, but the current law has a little bit of ambiguity. We actually have a case on appeal right now in the New Mexico Court of Appeals on that exact issue, on whether or not police officers can themselves act as a reporting party. Again, when you look at most jurisdictions across the country, we allow frontline police officers and medical professionals to serve as reporting parties. The other thing that we've noticed in looking at some of the red flag laws from across the country is the ability to redact some of the identifying information, particularly when a reporting party has filed for a red flag order. That order is then denied by the court. One of the things that raises a concern for us is if a mom a spouse or somebody who has a concern about a close family member being both dangerous and having access to weapons, if that person doesn't have firearms removed from their home, the person who reported them to law enforcement then potentially becomes a target for retribution and can be themselves a victim of gun violence. And so we certainly want to add protections, both, again, to improve public safety, but also to give reporting parties a better sense of security that their information won't be revealed until those firearms are actually removed from the home. And then the last element, which seems relatively straightforward and common sense, but something that needs to be clarified in the law, there are other judicial proceedings right now, for example, a finding that somebody should be involuntarily committed or a finding that somebody is incompetent to stand trial. Those are judicial decisions that have examined someone's mental state and determined that someone can't go through the judicial process or needs to be committed for some period of time. One of the things that doesn't currently happen is a mandatory referral from the courts to law enforcement officers, notifying law enforcement officers that that is somebody who can then be a subject for a red flag removal of a firearm. While there are rules in place to mandate the reporting of those judicial actions so that the information is uploaded into NCIC, it doesn't cross over to law enforcement as an identification of somebody who should be potentially the subject of a red flag order. I think the larger perspective for everyone to take is that we have an existing framework that balances the Second Amendment rights of every citizen in this country to keep and bear arms, but also recognizing that we have important tools to remove weapons from the hands of people who are dangerous, who are suffering from acute mental health disorders. And it's a balanced, targeted, and focused approach that we think is going to help mitigate the chances of mass casualty, mass shooting events, and ultimately really is just a common sense way to reduce the tragic harm that would result from gun violence and mass shootings that we've seen in communities all over the country, including right here in New Mexico. And so with that, we turn it over to Sheriff Allen to add any comments that he may have. And I think the importance of law enforcement recognizing that this is an important tool, and hopefully a tool that doesn't break down along partisan lines. We had a conversation earlier about the widespread use of red flag laws in the state of Florida. That's, I think, an example of where we need to be more assertive and more creative about how we use these tools that already exist. So, Sheriff Allen.
Thank you, Attorney General. Few comments, just to make sure that we're standing side by side with the Attorney General's office to address all this and be a voice for law enforcement. We know with the red flag law, there's confusion for law enforcement, who we petition and everything that the AG has laid out. We want to make sure in the training why we hosted it is to make sure that our detectives, field officers, and people all over the state of New Mexico understand what they can do and what they can't do and what the problems might be. And also making sure that we're updating laws. We know that it's been in effect for a while, but we want to make sure it's the most updated and make sure it's the most clear and concise and make sure that there's opinions and things that go to lawmakers so we can adjust the laws. We've said it before, other than other laws that are on the books, everybody says enforce the law. Well, we must evolve with what's going on. And we saw what happened in Maine. We saw what's going on around the nation. We're dedicated as law enforcement to make sure we're addressing all of those issues. We want to make sure that we're protecting the right people and at the same time protecting lawful gun-abiding citizens. So this is also helping law enforcement with just another tool to make sure that mass harm and anything we can do to negate another death, even if that's one too many. We want to make sure that we stand in solidarity with all law enforcement in the state of New Mexico and our nation to make sure we're doing what we need to do to fulfill our role in the oath we took to protect all and make sure that we do it correctly and constitutionally. Other than that, thank you.
And so with that, I think we'd stand for any questions you may have. Faith? Yeah.
Yes, and they're all sitting behind you. That's what they're in for training as part of our behavioral health unit, making sure that mistakes that were made in the past from just not us, but from all law enforcement, We want to make sure the tool is being utilized correctly, and we know we're going to see this and doing everything we can do to prevent a death, but make sure, loopholes that are found. With someone with behavioral health issues, with someone with domestic violence, someone that shouldn't have a firearm, what are we doing as a law enforcement entity to make sure that that's not occurring, and we're doing everything we can do to prevent a death? Mm-hmm.
Since the red, I guess since this hasn't rolled out, there has been 20 counties that haven't filed for a petition.
Mhm.
What are you guys gonna do? I know you said you sent out letters. Have you heard back from any of these other 20 counties that haven't filed anything, and have you heard if they're gonna be training?
So we are making sure that every law enforcement agency knows that our office is available to conduct that training. It's obviously not mandatory for local law enforcement, but we would certainly encourage them to avail themselves of the training so they can ask some of these more nuanced and complicated questions. And we can go through and some of the things you probably see if you stick around and watch some of the training we're going to conduct today. We go through hypothetical situations about people in different jurisdictions and how that works, what kind of where the venue is properly established, what court to do, to proceed with the filing. Ultimately, though, we are hoping that other law enforcement leaders will start recognizing that this is an important tool that is, number one, constitutionally sound. It's something that strikes the right balance between the Second Amendment, but also the very real concerns that people have about the accessibility of weapons for people who are exhibiting really dangerous signs of psychological distress. And it's a way for us to use existing law and hopefully improve existing law to make everyone safer and to improve public safety and reduce gun violence in those communities. We obviously can't make people engage in it, but we are certainly making the resource available to them if they'd like to learn more about it.
Have you heard from any of these counties that they would like to?
Today's training is the very first revamped training that we're going to be offering, and so the correspondence that was sent out is very new. But my hope is that the people will be taking us up on the offer in the relatively near future. My expectation is that for larger departments in some of the bigger cities who have established units that are focused on behavioral health issues, they will probably be some of the early adopters, the police departments that are really ready to dedicate more resources. I think some of the smaller jurisdictions may not have quite the same level of resources to dedicate to this, but my hope is that we can train as many people as we can. And then the second piece is that even after we train law enforcement, we have to continually remind members of the public that there is something that can be done. And so as part of what we're doing, we've also updated the website at the Attorney General's office to include step-by-step instructions on what someone, if they are recognizing signs of danger, that there is a red flag that they need to be concerned about, what do they do? And we're hoping to try and raise public awareness around that. One of the things that the sheriff and I were talking about earlier is that if you look at all the mass shootings in this country historically, almost every one of them, after the fact, after they're doing their investigation, they go back and identify a mother, a brother, a spouse, a coach. If you look at Lewiston, Maine, right, the commanders at his reserve unit had concerns. Local law enforcement had concerns. Members of his family had concerns. That's the usual pattern. It's very rare that there are no warning signs and then a mass shooting. And so what we need the public to understand is if they see something, they need to take action, and there's a way for them to do it, and law enforcement is ready and willing to assist them in that process.
Do you guys plan on, or can you clarify, do you guys plan on doing this consistently, or how many times are you planning on doing it?
So our plan is to go to literally every agency that requests a training. We will provide that training for free. We will go to them. We will work around their schedule and their needs. We're even going to make this training available by video for smaller departments that may not have the ability to pull, a small police department together in one place at one time, and it would impact their department. We're going to make the training available by video for them. TJ.
Sheriff Allen, this was debated in the Brown House for 2 years before it was passed. Sheriff's Association stood in solidarity against the red flag law. Only one sheriff was for it. Sounds like you were for the red flag law. Is there any concern, and maybe AG Torres can answer this, that it's intentionally not being used because law enforcement was against the concept of it to begin with?
I mean, there's always a concern when you look at it that way. What we want it to be is not a concern for everybody to be on the same page. I think we can't be so selfish for any political reasons or anything that's party aligned. Again, are we saving a life? Are we doing and utilizing a tool that's important to make sure that a mass shooting or just another domestic violence homicide is prevented? That's what's more important to me personally. I would hope that the other sheriffs would understand that's where we're also coming from. I know they have their own personal opinions about it, but again, it's a law, and we do have discretion as law enforcement leaders or officers or deputies or officials, but can you utilize that to help make something positive and prevent a death? And that's where we're coming from. Bottom line, and it's a common sense law to me, it's just we do need adjustments and to make sure the confusion isn't there.
I just want a little bit more clarification on the question I asked. Is this going to be a one-time training and that's it, or do you guys plan it like every year to do the training?
No. So to follow up on your question, we're not only going to conduct training statewide, but we will offer continual training. And we're going to have to do that because, as I mentioned before, we have a case up on appeal that's probably going to clarify exactly what a reporting party is. And then hopefully if we get some movement on proposed legislation, that may also alter the law. So this is the kind of training that has to occur on an ongoing basis.
Just to follow up on his question, so there's those 20 counties that haven't filed a petition. Do you think that is because of the stubbornness, or do you think this, I guess, training is going to help them actually start these petitions, or why do you think they haven't even filed a petition and it's successful?
Well, look, I'm not gonna speculate about whether or not there's an ideological or political reason for why we see petitions in certain counties and not in others. Our job is to try and make sure that the law is as helpful as it can be for law enforcement, and that the public understands what kind of tools are available to them. I continue to think that a large part of this has to do with the fact that the public may not be aware that there actually is something that they can do, that there are concrete steps to take, and a lot of this is just education. And my hope is that when we start educating people in the public and in law enforcement about what it is and what it is not, that will allay any concerns people may have and also clarify how it can be useful. I think what's interesting and what has changed even in just the last few years, red flag laws enjoy support from not only a majority of voters, a majority of gun owners. In a poll that was conducted last year, people support red flag laws. I'm a gun owner. I know the sheriff is a gun owner. And I know a great many other gun owners who recognize and understand that there are people who have access to weapons who are also dangerous, who are mentally unstable. And most gun owners don't want to have weapons accessible to those people either. And so I think if we can focus on educating folks and clarifying what the law permits and allows, that hopefully we will be able to use this in a way that's responsible, effective, targeted, and most importantly, it strikes, I think, the right balance between competing constitutional interests and concerns. It recognizes the right to keep and bear arms, but it also recognizes the right that the public has in being safe from people who are clearly dangerous and shouldn't have access to weapons. Matt?
Does this, and I just don't know, does this stop someone from buying a gun? So say you take their guns away and then they go to a gun store. Does this show up on a background check? And then is there like a responsibility by a gun dealer to not sell someone a gun based on the
So Matt's a great question. There's already a provision, and it's section 34-9-19, that requires when there is an individual who has been recognized as posing a danger that information is uploaded into NCIC. And so that was a state law that was passed, I believe, in 2016. And that is supposed to inform the background check system so that someone cannot buy a weapon. But the judge in this circumstance has the ability not only to order that weapons that are currently possessed by that individual are removed from their possession, but also to prevent them from buying new weapons.
Okay, and so obviously there's things that like if it comes up on a background check, they're not giving you a gun. That's like, is this one of those things where it's like it's a requirement that like they cannot sell you a gun if they have had this happen? It's a, like if this comes up on a background check, like they're legally not allowed to sell that.
Assuming, and this is always the big assumption when it comes, you'll see how many members of law enforcement there are in the room right now. They know as well as I do that we are only as good as the information system that we have, the databases that we use, and the information that we share across agencies. But assuming that the correct information is transmitted from court systems into NCIC and into the background check system, it should prevent the purchase of a new weapon. But there is a lot of work, I know from my own experience as district attorney, in updating and upgrading and making sure you have correct information and clean and accurate information.
So it's possible that like because the systems don't talk as well as they could be, that it could slip.
The law is clear. I mean, what I can say is that the law on this point is absolutely clear. Whether or not we have implemented all the technology that needs to be implemented to make sure that the data systems are actually in real-time communication, that's a different issue, and I'm not in a position right now to give you a sense of, for example, how long it takes to upload a judicial order that recognizes somebody poses a danger. What is the time difference, and what's the failure rate? I'm not in a position to answer that question.
If someone sells, but like as far as the law is concerned, if someone sells someone a gun and that shows up on a background check, can that person be prosecuted for selling that gun, or is that against the law, I guess?
They under federal law, you are, as part of being an NFFL, you're supposed to abide by the terms of what permits someone to sell a weapon. And if the background check comes up and says this person is disqualified for any reason, a felony conviction, addiction to drugs, being the subject of a domestic violence order of protection. I mean, that was before the Supreme Court yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court. Any of those issues, if that information is provided to the background check system, it should keep the FFL from selling that weapon. But again, a lot of these systems are not as reliable as we would all like them to be. I think the larger point is there anyone in New Mexico right now, anywhere in this state, who deep in their heart is looking or thinking about not some stranger, but their brother, their spouse, a member of their family, somebody who is really struggling usually with a mental health issue, and you know they are armed, and you know perhaps they are making threats about harming themselves or harming someone else in their community. Do the members of the public anywhere in this state know that they can go to law enforcement and provide that information? And if that information is credible, and that's an important thing, and if a district court judge, who is an independent finder of fact, evaluates that information and says, yes, this person is a danger, then that's a tool to get firearms out of that person's hands, either on a temporary basis or on a one-year basis that can be renewed over time. My primary concern is that there may be somebody in some community in New Mexico that is in that moment right now, and they don't know what to do, and they don't know where to go, and they need to understand that law enforcement is there to help them if they find themselves in that situation. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.